Hi, this is Frankie from aboutscript, and in this video we're going to learn about using tabs with knockout. So a tab is something like these tabs up here, and we're also going to be learning about virtual elements, which will help us make our tabs, and about custom functions for knockout observables, editing the traditional observables by adding functions to them that help you in your view model. So first thing is this custom function here. You see it's a function that returns a function, which is often called a generator. And what it does is, because it's going to be called on an observable, something like if we make an observable self.tab, and we need to have that anyway, so we're going to just set that to 0. What we're going to be doing with this is you can call tab.setter and pass it a value, and every time that something happens, such as a click event, this function here is going to be called, which will update the observable. We'll see why that can be very useful. Now we're also going to make another one, and we're just going to duplicate this code here, save ourselves some typing, and we're going to call this eq for equals. And then in this function we're going to be returning whether or not the observable equals that value. Just because sometimes there's little glitches with observables, and we write our code wrong. We want to make it so that the string 1 and the number 1 are the same, which is why we will compare it type insensitive with the double equals instead of the traditional triple equals. So now what we can do is come over into our code and start working on these tabs. So if you look here, I've just created one tab button for now, and all of these are going to be hidden except for the active tab. So first we want to make these tabs change our tab observable here. So to do that, we can say tab.setter, and we're going to set this to 1. Now if we just duplicate this for our 3 tabs and change each of these, now these buttons will change the value of our tab observable. Now we're going to come down here, and we can do this in a few ways. One, we could use an if binding. Sorry, I forgot to say click is the binding for each of these. That's what's going to change it. We click. We could use an if binding in each of these elements. However, the problem with that is that we're still going to have these fluid rows here. We're going to have the outer tags visible. It's just going to get rid of the content inside of it. So a better way to do this is using something called virtual elements. So we create an XML comment tag. The difference between XML and HTML is there's an exclamation point here in HTML. However, Knockout likes us to use XML. And then we say if tab.eq 1, then we're going to be doing this. Okay, and then at the end of each of these, we put /ko in another comment tag. So Knockout's going to be going around and wrapping all of these in this, or we're going to be going around and wrapping all of these in this, and then Knockout is at load time going to read these comment tags using its awesome Knockout powers, and it's going to decide whether or not they should be displayed at any point, and remember that it needs to update these should anything change with the tags, or the observables rather. So we change that, and I believe I may have done something wrong in that we don't actually want to make this one a generator. This one is simply going to return whether or not the observable equals a value. And actually it should be returning a ko.computed. So it is generating, but in a different way. And so every time our observable that we're checking in here is changed, our computed will be reevaluated, and it'll determine whether or not we need to change these tabs or not. So let's just make sure that everything's working. Go over here. That needs to be /ko. And we're going to change this to 2 and this to 3. Silly little mistakes. So now if we click 1, tab 1 shows, 2, tab 2 shows, and 3, tab 3 shows. So to review what we learned, these are how you would write an conditional comment tag that determines whether or not everything inside it should show. There's also things like for each. So for example, you could put this inside an unordered list if only part of it was dynamic. There's lots of uses for these, and a lot of times they make the code a lot cleaner, both when writing it and when rendering it. We also learned about setting custom functions, and how these work is every time an observable is created, such as here, it checks ko.observable.fn and puts all of its properties and methods onto this new object that's going to be stored there. We can then call these in our view, creating much simpler code than the alternative, which is somewhat long. We would create a function that says tab equals 1, and then a semicolon. That's the alternative to tab.setter2. So this just helps keep our code nice and organized, which is very important, and the reason that we're using Knockout in the first place. Once we have that, we can create lots of interesting and awesome things and keep our code shorter everywhere while making it reusable by putting this in another file. In the next video, I'm going to be going over how to write more complex bindings, such as things like fading in and fading out in Knockout, as well as creating user interface elements such as a slider that uses JavaScript and jQuery. So that's going to be it for this video, and come back for that because that's going to be really exciting, and I'm working on a widget library for Knockout.js, which will make it awesome to integrate in your application. Thank you.